subject of death and dying can be a very difficult conversation to have. Many of us avoid having the conversation because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't want to worry or upset our loved ones, and we really don't want to face tough questions or think about our own death. Having open conversations about death and dying allows us to prepare ourselves and our loved ones on how we would like to create our own end-of-life journey. On every episode of Guided Crossings, we will explore a different part of the dying process and offer suggestions on how to prepare your loved ones as well as yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Sebastian, and this is Guided Crossings. We all know that there are many differences between men and women, and how each group grieves is no different. On today's show, I am pleased to welcome Chuck Johnson and Roby Robitaille to discuss men and grief. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'll start. I've been with the Visiting Nurse Association of Manchester and Southern New Hampshire as the bereavement coordinator and hospice chaplain for 12 years. And so prior to that, I worked for almost 20 years in social work with children, adolescents, and families. And throughout all of that, I've spent a significant amount of time helping people navigate grief and loss in their lives. And so with the different duties that I have at VNA, it's difficult for me to do as much. And so we have volunteers that help us with our different programs, from bereavement groups to one-on-one support to telephone support. And we wouldn't be able to provide all the different bereavement things that we do to people if we didn't have volunteers that could help us.
Nice. And Roby, how did you get involved in volunteering?
I had a wife who was extremely ill, and hospice came into the picture, which kind of got me to take a look at it. So I've been doing this for about 22 years now.
Wow.
And I do grief counseling. I do a one-on-one. I do 8-week groups, and the big one is the men's group.
Okay. Well, why don't we just start from the beginning? Like, how do men grieve differently than, say, women or children?
Okay. Well, not to kind of jump into like the stereotype kind of things, but there are some basic differences between men and women. Mm-hmm. And those things hold true as how they grieve and bereave in their bereavement issues. So if you think of like men as being the protectors and the people that they kind of confront things side to side as they approach things, women tend to do things more from the nurturing side of point, and so they want to engage people face to face and are more comforting. So for men, their bereavement is more about doing an action than it is wanting to talk and, let me share it doesn't work that way for men generally. They want to confront the issues that are dealing with them. How do I do this now? How do I do this? How do I cope? And it's a bit of a process for them.
Okay. And, sorry?
They generally want to internalize. They don't want to talk about it. And that's how they deal with grief. And in the long run, it causes problems.
What are some of the signs, like if you're talking to a man and you kind of suspect maybe there's some grief or he's in mourning, what are some of the signs you can look out for?
Well, I would say that you don't even have to differentiate between men and women as far as for the signs, because we all tend to grieve and respond to any significant type of loss in similar fashions. And I usually suggest to my coworkers and stuff that you can tell that a person's grieving when there's any kind of significant deviation from their normal patterns, and how that plays out in, are they, what's it doing for their eating? Has that changed? What's it doing for their sleeping? What's it doing for their types of activities and involvements that they've been doing normally, like before that? And then sometimes it has to do with like their moods and responses to things. And so when you see that change from, this is how they normally are, but this is how they are now, and there's a bit of a significant gap there, that's a good indication that something more is happening that it's important to get a handle on.
Okay. How would you then approach it to suggest maybe they need some sort of counseling or what's the best way to maybe tell them, like, I'm experiencing, or I'm feeling like you're withdrawing, or you're not eating as much, or you've lost a significant weight. Like, what are some of the ways, someone can approach that?
Normally, they will approach us because people feel that something's wrong now. They don't know what's going on, and they may not even think that it's grief. They may think, oh, there's something, it's something else, because they're not thinking that. And then they just start looking for help. Well, my loved one has just died, or in the case of, like, for men in grief, their spouse or partner has just died, and they're looking, I don't know what to do. Mm-hmm. And they just will Google and find us.
Okay. I also think, though, it's interesting because we always think of grief in the loss of a loved one, but grief can be the loss of a marriage, can be the loss of a job,
anything, pet.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's something else that sometimes we have to be maybe a little bit more diligent in looking into, mm-hmm. for men or for women or for anybody.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Some of them we get just from hospice. A person dies, we approach them right away to think about getting into an 8-week group or a men's group. Some of them come, like we got one today that's his wife died and he's beside himself and wants to try to find a group. So I'll be calling him over the weekend to work something out.
Right. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and in his case that Roby's referring to, his friend was concerned about him because the friend lost their spouse, and now this fellow helped them. And now his spouse just died. And so they thought, oh, well, he's away right now. So this really helped me. And so I think it would help. So he's kind of spoken to him and spoken to us to try and lay that. So sometimes friends do that. They'll communicate to us, I have a friend and I want to find out what you have. Mm-hmm. And so then getting information to them to help them know that these are some resources that you can reach out to us and we can support you in.
Well, and I think that's another side of it. Like, if, say you're not involved with a hospice per se, and someone passes away suddenly, or, so through hospice, obviously they have the conversation, they're telling the families you can get this kind of help and stuff like that. When it's a sudden maybe death, or, you don't have the same ability, you don't have the same support around you. Mm-hmm. So they're free to just sort of call hospice, or how do they figure that all out?
Yeah. They can, and we'll kind of can put our names and our numbers up towards the end here.
Yeah.
But they contact us directly, and when they respond to, if you Google bereavement support, the VNA is going to pop up in one of your top 5 searches in the area. And so when you respond to that brings into my email. And so then I respond, and we kind of reach out to people. And sometimes one of the biggest questions is like, I'm not sure. And I said, well, I can meet with you one-on-one, and we can kind of figure out whether you want like our men's drop-in group or our 8-week group or whatever, and I can help you find out what it is that you kind of need. Because sometimes people think, oh, I need a counselor, or I need this or that. I said, well, let me spend some time with you. Right. And then that will help them to kind of determine what it is that they need. And then we just kind of figure that out and move from there.
Right. So, Roby, you do counseling for groups and also one-on-one?
Yep.
Okay. So when it's a one-on-one situation, do they contact your organization, Chuck, and then you put it through to Roby to do his thing?
Then I get the assignment. And usually we do one-on-one as a temporary thing, because it's before, if they want to go into an 8-week group, it's too early to go into the group, because we try to keep people away from any kind of groups for at least 8 weeks. Because if they can't string a sentence in a meeting, it's a waste of time. So then we have them, I'll maybe keep them in a one group for 2 or 3 weeks, and then when the 8-week group begins, then we move them into that. If they don't want to go into an 8-week group and it's a male, then I'll put them right into the men's group.
Okay. Well, that's another point that I was just, when you're talking, I was thinking about, everybody in your groups are at different stages of grief. So it must be kind of tricky to coordinate someone who might be kind of at the end, I shouldn't say end of grief because there's no such thing, but who have kind of accepted and dealt with the grief, and then are going out of your group and then a newcomer coming, are the groups situated where everybody's sort of at the same stop?
No.
Okay.
And even if that were the case, but they're there because they're struggling. So they're coming in, they're fresh into their grief. So you could have lost somebody 6 months ago. If you're struggling right now, you're struggling. So it doesn't take 5 minutes for that group to be all the same playing field.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And even in the men's drop-in group and our women's drop-in group are geared specifically for those people that need that support right away. And then what happens is sometimes people that are participating in that group and have been for an extended period of time, they feel like they're kind of processing and working through their grief really effectively, but they want to keep on staying in the group because the group helped them. Now they want to turn that back around and be an influence and involvement in the group to help other newcomers coming into the group, and that happens sometimes as well.
Nice.
And so it's an ongoing beneficial system so that we facilitate, but it's the people's interactions in the group that helps them understand how to deal with that tragic loss, how to deal with that unexpected death, how to deal with the different things that are impacting them. And they see in the eyes of other folks that same sense of feeling that they're experiencing, and they know that they're being understood and heard, and people know how they're feeling. And it's really that mutual being part of that together that is such a healthy, constructive thing for them.
Well, and I think that's a really interesting point, because I think, someone will say, you've lost someone, like when my sister lost her spouse, and it was like, I know how you feel. And it's like, you don't know how I feel.
No.
You have absolutely no idea how I'm feeling. And it's very isolating for the person who's grieving with the loss, because they do feel like they're completely alone and no one gets it. But in these groups, it's nice because everyone there understands that sort of feeling.
And I'm a facilitator. I'm part of the group. I'm a facilitator. It's their group. I let them take it as much as possible in the direction that they want it to go, and that's because that's why it works. We don't have an agenda on how we run our meetings.
Right. So, and how many people are normally in one of the groups?
In men's group, I have 28 guys.
Okay.
We generally have 10 or 12 to show up. Any more than that gets a little hairy for me, because, but to give you some idea how the group works, I did 8-week cruise for, 5 years. And if we were lucky to have one man in the group, we did well. So we said, something wrong with this. So we started contacting them and asked if they would be interested into a men's group. And even that was hairy. So we got them to sign up for the group. And I can still remember, just like yesterday, that was almost 20 years ago. And I walked in and I had this big box of mixed donuts.
Donuts always draws people.
And I had 2 big jugs of Dunkin' Donuts coffee. And I put it down. And you know what? If I had left, they wouldn't have cared. But they bonded, and that's what the best part of this thing was. And I try to run it really loose. I have in the 8-week group, we have specific guidelines and things we talk about every week, and we try, because it's 10 people and it's mixed. The men's group, I walk in and I may talk about baseball for 10 minutes.
So when you talk about the guidelines, you're talking about like the co-ed people, like the groups where there's men and women all together.
Yeah,
but when it's a men's group, you
out the window. It doesn't work. That's not what they want to do.
Do you find, sorry, this might not be something you can answer, but when there's men and women in the group together, can you almost feel like the men are not participating the same way? And
at the first 2 meetings, it's like pulling teeth. But then the women are very good at that. They'll dig in and they'll make.
We want to talk about it. We got to get it out. Yeah.
And it's fun to watch from my point of view. By the 8th week, it's running. It's really cool. It's really cool.
It sounds like you really enjoy it.
Oh yeah, I have a blast. I have a blast.
Well, and sometimes in those co-ed groups, sometimes men, like I said before, men like to try and fix things. So sometimes if they're seeing an emotional reaction from someone else in the joint group and stuff, they'll say, well, what about, and they'll want to suggest something, and we kind of try to say, well, that's okay, but let's focus more on just how they're feeling and the expression of it, because it's your grief isn't something that needs to be fixed. Your grief is something that needs to be processed, and it's okay to be sad. It's okay to start feeling good. And sometimes people feel guilty because they're starting to feel good about where they're at in their grief, but I should still be grieving. And to help them kind of navigate this new landscape that they're trying to figure out is really a key thing in grief.
Well, go ahead.
One of the things that's helped me through this program is I lost a wife 15 years ago, and I remarried. And that puts me in the same place as them. I've been there, done that. It also gives them the hope that you can start a new life again. So it's unreal what all these little things do to get into the picture.
Right. And it's just so important to have these groups so that people know that they're available and that you can do something, you know. So a little change of topic, but we were talking about it earlier and I thought it was worth mentioning. What about what not to say? Remember, we were kind of saying some of the things that we go to that are our go-to phrases that, you know, you had made a good point. We say them to kind of make us feel like we're saying something important, but for the person receiving it, who's the person who's grieving, it can backfire. Yeah,
absolutely, because it's good. I mean, we sincerely want to support our friends who have their loss is more intense, and it may have been our friend too, but it was their spouse or their partner. And so we want to help them. And so sometimes we say some of those platitudes and kind of, oh, well, they're in a better place, or, oh, at least they're not in pain. And as nice and sincere as that is, that's not the point. Because the point is, for the person that's lost their spouse, their partner, it's like, well, okay, sure, that's good that they're in a different place, but they're not here right now. And so it's important when you're dealing and talking to people that you ask kind of open-ended questions, not, well, are you doing okay? No, but how are you doing? What's happening? What sort of things are you doing? And you ask those open-ended questions. And sometimes it's important to make sure it's okay to say, what have you been doing since so-and-so's death or since so-and-so died? And when you use that terminology, it shows them that it's okay to talk about death and dying. It's okay to talk about how you're feeling. And you can, because you're using that same language. So then they go, okay, I can. This is someone that I can talk to, and you're not going to try and help me feel better. I can just, because I'm not feeling good. I'm doing, since their death, I can't believe, some people, and they can, it opens up the door for them to be able to broach that subject and get into really what they're thinking and what they're feeling.
Right, so kind of no judgment, just sort of give them permission to say what they're going to need to say and hope for the best that they're going to do that.
Yeah, and be prepared to offer them time too, because sometimes, especially for men, they may not want to say anything. You'll say that and it'll take them maybe a few minutes of silence, and that's okay. You don't need to fill the silence with, well, you're looking good. Yeah. You can go ahead and let the silence help them work through and get to some of the things that they might want to say or they might want to express.
That's something that really has to be practiced, because I can't imagine.
I do that all the time.
Right, I imagine, because women too were fixers a lot of the things, and so to just sort of sit back.
There's nothing that makes a person want to talk when you're sitting there, 7 or 8 people, the dialogue has stopped and nobody's talking. I think we all have it's in your gut, you got to say something. And usually they give me the best piece of information about what's wrong in their lives at that moment.
Wow. Yeah, I think when you have been, privileged to watch that, you do notice that. I know, like I had mentioned, I became an end-of-life doula, and just listening to some of those, the way you're trained and stuff is like, don't fix it. You can't fix it. Just sit in silence with people, and you'll find a lot more information. But it's hard because mostly too, we're social people. So, you know, you want to chat all the time, or, you know, how are things? And, you know, so it's I guess it's a hard lesson to learn, but once you've learned it, it's a good thing you guys are out there doing it.
Well, and you just hit on that again when you said, you know, it doesn't need to be fixed, or we can't fix it. And the bottom line and the main thing is that there's nothing broken when you're grieving. That's your natural psychological processing of how you deal with loss. Like any significant loss, like we said, loss of job, loss of family, loss of a significant loved one. Any of those things will trigger that grief response. Why? Because that's how we're wired. And trying to get a handle on that. And so utilizing and being in relationships with others helps us kind of figure that out, that it isn't about fixing anything. It's about gaining understanding, and a different understanding of, now that I'm on this new landscape, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how to, I've never been here before. And you can come alongside as a friend and say, yeah, I've never been here with you before either. And as familiar as I may be with this or that or whatever, this is new landscape for me too. And together, we'll figure it out.
Right.
We'll travel this road together.
Which is just, you know, I'm sure really helpful for a lot of people. One of the other things that we were talking about was, if someone doesn't want to go into a group, can they fix their grief on their own? What are some things they can maybe do for themselves to, I don't know, get through some days?
Well, it's kind of like, how good are you at operating on yourself? You know, you really can't. I mean, there's things that you can do to improve your understanding that, oh yeah, I'm really hurting and stuff, but you really need someone else. And so sometimes,
even if it's just a family member.
Absolutely. There will be people in your network, and one of the first things I say to people is, have you spoken to your doctor about this? Because the doctor is able to assess you on the long term, because usually your GP is someone that's been involved with you for a number of years and knows you pretty well. And so they'll see this difference, and that they're a good resource. Family members and friends, good friends. And for men, they generally don't have a whole lot of good friends, but they have a few close friends. And connecting with them and letting them be a part, as well as reaching out, like to organizations and stuff, say, yeah, I could use some help, or I think I might be able to use some help. I'm not sure. And that will help them. So it's the relational aspect of how we need to function. It's important that we connect with others, because you really can't do it on your own. You can do some things, but to take that next step, you really have to connect with someone, I think.
Get a good support group around you and hope for that to help. Yeah. So what are some misconceptions about grief?
I think the biggest one I deal with, and I just, I don't understand that people think I'm going to be able to figure out this. And you don't. My wife died 16, 17 years ago. I still think of her every day, and I'm happily married. I just learned to deal with it, and with each day, it gets easier, and because I start seeing the good side of things that are happening.
So you didn't, maybe, I don't know if this is the right word, but you didn't have to focus, with time, you didn't focus as much on the grief. But I think for me, and we were talking about this, like, my mom passed a while ago, like 11 years, 12 years, and it's like weird because I could still talk about her all day, and you don't get over it. You never get over it. You always have that need, or, the memories and things. And I think that with human beings, we think if we're talking to someone who's just had a loss, we're thinking we can't bring it up because if we bring it up, they're going to be sad.
Yeah.
But the reality is when you've had a loss, you're always okay to talk about it, right?
Yeah, and again, one of the other misconceptions is you think that, oh, well, I've gone through the denial, and I've gone through the withdrawal, I've gone through the anger, I've gone through the bargaining, I'm kind of moving on through this and stuff, and it's been 2 months. So it's done. There's a time frame.
That's when you get blindsided.
And it's like, and grief isn't a linear progression. Grief is a cyclical kind of thing that it hits us many times, and we go through things many times and in many ways and stuff. And so that's a key misconception. That doesn't mean that, oh, gee, yeah, you did it wrong the first time. It's like, no, it's
right
a process.
way. Yeah.
And like Roby said, it gets a little bit easier because you become more familiar to this new loss that you have, and you get accustomed and learn new ways to figure things out, to do things. And so it never goes away. It just becomes less intense and becomes something that you're more familiar with.
One of the things I really push with the groups is I think you need to do something to remember.
Yeah.
What I personally did, I put in a big flower bed in my backyard, and it's got a sign, the name of my wife, Lucille's garden.
Nice.
And I do that all the time. I had a couple who was in one of my groups, and they were avid bicyclists. So the husband, who was 34, had a heart attack when he was biking, died. And the whole group got together, raised money, and they bought a piece of land, and they made a bicycle range out of it. So they're promoting the memory of him. And so they're looking at his memory now was a nice event as opposed to a death.
Right. So like keeping a legacy, create a legacy for
So
somebody.
It's not a negative, and that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So what other kind of legacy projects have you had, like, heard of and things?
Well, I have one of the guys had a tree planted in a church. So it doesn't have to be anything big.
Right.
One lady, instead of a formal burial stone, she had a bench made for her
That's
where
very
his
common.
stone
It's
would be, and
nice,
she goes there every day to sit and pray and talk to him.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I think it's nice though, like we've talked often on this show about grief, and I do feel that it's more of an acceptance maybe now. People are understanding it a little bit better maybe than, for me anyway, 25 years ago, we were kind of like, well, it's been 6 months while you're still mourning,
Yeah,
or
I know.
grieving.
I was that way too.
Right. So I think it's nice now that we are understanding, and I feel, and I don't work in the industry, but that we are more accepting and more understanding of it. Is that a fair?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, especially for the people that are grieving, because sometimes their loved ones say, shouldn't you be over this? And they start feeling bad, and I reinforce and I say, just, they're well-meaning, but they're wrong. It's not about getting over, it's about continuing to working through and continuing, like moving forward.
Right. Well, unfortunately, we're almost out of time, but if people want more information on joining your groups or just more information on bereavement and grief, where's the best place they should go for that?
Yep, the easiest place, if they were, again, they could Google or they can just go to manchestervna.org, and that'll take them into the Solution Health Systems site, and they'll see on there, bereavement supports, and they can click on that, and they'll get right to us.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much, Les. I told you this half hour flies.
Sure did.
Thanks all for watching. The subject of death and dying can be a very difficult conversation to have. Many of us avoid having the conversation because it makes us uncomfortable. We don't want to worry or upset our loved ones, and we really don't want to face tough questions or think about our own death. Having open conversations about death and dying allows us to prepare ourselves and our loved ones on how we would like to create our own end-of-life journey. On every episode of Guided Crossings, we will explore a different part of the dying process and offer suggestions on how to prepare your loved ones as well as yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Sebastian, and this is Guided Crossings.